This, of course, came as a huge shock, and William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of our young family.
The ceremony had been moving with military precision when Catherine suddenly stopped. Not because of a security threat, not because of a mistake in the procession. Her eyes had locked onto one small piece of gold resting against Queen Camilla's chest. Within seconds, the Princess of Wales was no longer following protocol. She was staring at what she believed was Diana's private gold locket, and the entire royal rhythm began to fracture around her. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine knew instantly that this was no ordinary pause. Trooping the color, the annual military ceremony marking the sovereign's official birthday, runs on precision so strict that a mistimed step draws attention. Yet the princess did something almost unthinkable. She stepped out of formation, lifted one hand toward the ceremonial coordinator, and ordered her part of the proceedings to stop. Her face held no fury at first. It held disbelief. The locket hanging from Camilla's neck was small and painfully familiar. Camilla saw exactly where Catherine was looking. Her fingers moved toward the pendant on instinct, covering part of it as though that gesture could contain what had been recognized. Catherine did not raise her voice. "Where did you get that?" she asked. The queen consort hesitated. That pause changed everything, because silence in a moment like this sounded louder than denial. William noticed his wife's expression before he understood the cause. Then, he followed her gaze. The prince moved closer, and the instant he saw the pendant, his posture tightened. He knew the shape and small details remembered from photographs and family conversations about his mother. Diana's belongings were never simply objects to him. They were fragments of a life cut short, carrying meaning far beyond material value. A senior aide approached Catherine and urged her to return to position. She refused. The princess made clear that the ceremony would not continue normally until someone explained how a deeply personal piece associated with Diana had appeared around Camilla's neck. William stayed beside her, no longer observing. Camilla remained still, the locket fully visible between them. Then word reached Charles. The king had not yet entered the confrontation, but the message was stark. Catherine had halted part of trooping the color over an item she believed belonged to Diana. He stopped speaking. Silence followed. What had begun as one woman recognizing one small piece of gold was now moving toward the sovereign himself. What looked like a single emotional interruption was about to expose something far more dangerous, because Catherine was not the only person who recognized the locket. To everyone watching, it was only a piece of jewelry. To Catherine, William, and Camilla, it carried something much heavier. Diana had been gone for decades, yet her presence still lived inside the family, through memories, possessions, photographs, and wounds that had never completely disappeared. Catherine understood that better than most. She had never met her mother-in-law, but she had spent years watching the woman's legacy shape the husband standing beside her. Catherine had learned that royal inheritance was never only about wealth. Over the years, William had shared private family stories, childhood memories, and the meaning behind pieces connected to his mother, some of which had later become part of their own family life. The Princess of Wales knew that inherited jewelry could carry grief, identity, and memory all at once. Camilla understood something equally uncomfortable. Because her history with Charles and Diana remained fixed in public memory, anything once associated with the late princess could become emotionally charged the moment it touched her. William moved closer after the ceremony halted and kept his voice low. "Are you certain?" he asked. Catherine did not look away from Camilla. She said she had seen the locket before, in private family photographs that were never intended for public display. The prince followed her gaze again, searching his own memory, and the recognition in his face deepened the tension between them. Camilla slowly lowered her hand from the pendant. She did not remove it. Catherine noticed. That small decision changed her sadness into quiet resolve, because the queen consort now seemed fully aware that the object mattered. William remembered an old family conversation, in which Diana's personal effects had been separated into different groups after her death. Some items entered public collections, some passed to relatives, while others remained under private control. Those private arrangements meant certain possessions were preserved for family reasons rather than ordinary ceremonial use. Catherine felt the pieces connect. If the locket belonged to that protected group, Camilla should never have received it casually. Someone had transferred it, released it by mistake, or ignored an understanding that had existed for years. The Queen remained silent, and William no longer looked merely confused. He looked wounded. Then Catherine remembered why she was so certain. Years earlier, during a private discussion at Windsor, someone had mentioned this exact locket and attached a warning to it. She had almost forgotten the words. Now they returned with terrifying clarity inside the family, after everything they endured. To understand why Catherine refused to move on, the story had to return to the private conversation that first turned Diana's locket into a line no one was supposed to cross. The confrontation did not truly begin on the parade ground. Its roots stretched back to a quiet Windsor evening, when Catherine heard Diana's gold locket discussed by name. There were no cameras, no public ceremony, and no reason to imagine the conversation would ever matter beyond the family. Yet one sentence from that night remained lodged in her memory. Years later, seeing the same object against Camilla's dress, Catherine understood why that warning had been given. Catherine had been listening as Princess Anne spoke about possessions that carried more emotion than value. The locket was not crown jewelry, meaning it was never part of the ceremonial collection formally associated with the sovereign or the institution. It had been one of Diana's private pieces, modest in price, but heavy with family memory. Anne understood that distinction. Personal royal belongings could be protected by informal family agreements, even when no public rule existed, because ownership alone never measured grief, memory, or meaning. Anne then reached for a private photograph and showed it to Catherine. Diana was wearing the same small gold pendant. The Princess Royal explained that the locket had been placed deliberately with a restricted group of personal effects, after earlier disagreement over how some of Diana's belongings should be handled. She was precise. No senior royal was supposed to use that piece ceremonially. Catherine studied the photograph and asked why something so simple required such protection. Anne answered that the smallest objects could become the most dangerous when they carried memories nobody wanted reopened. William entered near the end of that conversation and immediately noticed the photograph in Catherine's hands. The prince stopped speaking. For several seconds, he simply looked at the locket before admitting that he remembered seeing it during childhood. After Anne left, he told his wife that he had never expected to see the pendant worn again. His voice stayed controlled, but Catherine understood the pain underneath it. This was not about gold. It was about a fragment of his mother's private life, being treated as something that could simply return to royal circulation. Catherine had almost buried that Windsor conversation until Trooping the Color changed everything. The ceremony, an annual military event marking the sovereign's official birthday, placed Camilla before the family wearing the very object Anne had warned against. Suddenly, every word returned. Someone had either ignored the restriction, misunderstood it, or deliberately removed it. Now Catherine knew her interruption had been more than instinct. She had stopped the ceremony because an old family boundary had been crossed in public. And when Anne was told what Camilla had worn, the Princess Royal's reaction would make silence impossible. Once Anne saw what Camilla was wearing, the confrontation Catherine had begun became impossible to contain. The ceremonial pause quickly became something far more personal. Catherine and Camilla were moved away from the immediate public formation, but privacy did nothing to soften the confrontation. For the first time, There was no distance between the symbol and the people carrying its history. Catherine wanted one answer. Camilla wanted the ceremony resumed. Neither woman was prepared to surrender, and William's arrival ensured that silence could no longer protect anyone. Catherine entered the private room with one purpose: stop the matter from being buried beneath protocol. Palace staff had guided the three royals away, while coordinators delayed proceedings outside, without explaining why. That delay mattered, because trooping the color, the carefully timed military ceremony marking the sovereign's official birthday, depends on strict public order. One unscripted interruption could become a national spectacle. Catherine knew that. She also knew that hiding the locket beneath clothing and walking back out would make the deeper problem disappear without an answer. Camilla stood opposite her and waited. Catherine did not shout. "Please take Diana's locket off," she said with deliberate calm. The Queen Consort's expression hardened almost immediately. She answered that Catherine had no authority to decide what the Queen could wear. The words landed heavily because neither woman was really arguing about rank. One was defending a boundary tied to Diana's memory. The other was refusing to be publicly judged by that memory again. William stepped between the silence before it could become something worse. He did not raise his voice either. The prince simply asked where the pendant had come from. Camilla looked at him, then hesitated. That pause angered him more than Catherine's demand ever could. To him, hesitation suggested knowledge. If she understood enough to pause, then perhaps she understood exactly what had been placed around her neck. Camilla finally broke the silence through a private conversation witnessed by the three of them. She said the locket had been released from a private royal collection after she requested something personal and understated for the occasion. Catherine immediately asked who approved it. The Queen named no one. Instead, she insisted everything had been handled properly through the household. That answer shifted the danger. A private royal collection meant possessions held and managed away from ordinary public display, often through trusted household staff. If Camilla had not taken the locket herself, then somebody with access had authorized its release, despite the old restriction. Then the door opened. Charles entered already aware of the argument. The king did not defend his wife. He looked toward the aide responsible for private collection access and asked one question. Who approved this? Catherine had challenged the wearer, but Charles was about to discover that the deeper question was, who had placed Diana's locket within Camilla's reach? Royal crises rarely remain emotional for long. Behind every possession sits a chain of custody. Every ceremonial choice passes through approval, and every mistake leaves somebody responsible. Charles now faced a choice more difficult than calming Catherine or defending Camilla. If the locket had been released against an existing family restriction, then the problem was no longer taste or sensitivity. It was authority. And someone inside his household had either misunderstood an order or ignored one. Charles asked for the internal release entry and read it in silence. Private royal belongings were tracked through inventories, custodians, and household authorization, meaning trusted staff recorded where sensitive items were kept and who could access them. As sovereign, the king held enormous authority over that machinery. Yet Diana's private legacy carried another claim, one rooted in William and Harry's memories of their mother. No administrative signature could erase that emotional boundary. Charles reached the notation attached to the locket and stopped. Catherine watched his expression change before he placed the page on the table without speaking. The entry showed that the pendant had once carried a restriction preventing ceremonial reuse. That line transformed the atmosphere. Catherine had not halted the event over a vague suspicion. The warning she remembered from Windsor had existed inside the household record. Camilla felt the room closing around her. She insisted she had been told the pendant was available, and rejected any suggestion that she had deliberately searched for something forbidden. The Queen Consort looked toward Charles for reassurance, but he gave none. He heard her explanation, then returned to the release entry. Silence from the king hurt more than accusation, because it showed he was no longer treating the dispute as a misunderstanding. The record revealed something worse. The restriction had been removed shortly before the ceremony, through an authorization attached to a request from Camilla's household. Yet Charles's personal instruction appeared nowhere on it. Someone had acted beneath the sovereign. Whether through assumption, pressure, or carelessness, a boundary had been lifted without his knowledge. Anne arrived before anyone could soften the discovery. Through a documented household account of the earlier Windsor discussion, the Princess Royal confirmed that the restriction had been deliberate. She reminded Charles that Diana's locket was specifically excluded from ceremonial reuse because of its personal meaning to the family. The king looked again at the record, then at Camilla. This time, there was no uncertainty left. Charles had enough to act. Catherine's interruption had been justified, and the decision coming next would place Camilla under pressure. For Catherine, the truth offered no relief, because proving the locket should never have been released meant the consequences could no longer be avoided. The most powerful moment came without shouting. Charles looked at Camilla, then at Diana's locket, and made the decision everyone in the room had been avoiding. The pendant would be removed immediately. The ceremony would resume only after it had been secured and its release investigated. Camilla did not argue at first. She simply stood still, absorbing the fact that Catherine's intervention had prevailed, and that Diana's memory had once again altered the balance inside the royal family. Charles gave the instruction with controlled finality. The locket would return to restricted private custody, meaning it would be placed back among personal belongings kept under limited family access rather than ordinary ceremonial use. He added another condition. No personal object connected to Diana would be released again without direct review involving William. The king understood why that mattered. This was not simply about preventing another mistake. It was about recognizing that a son's connection to his mother could not be erased by household procedure. Camilla reached behind her neck. Her fingers struggled briefly with the clasp before the chain finally came free. She placed the pendant into the small case held out by an aide, then looked toward Catherine. "I did not steal it," the queen consort said quietly. The words carried humiliation as much as anger. Catherine's expression softened, but she did not retreat. She answered that theft had never been the accusation. The wound came from seeing something so personal to Diana, worn publicly, without William even knowing it had left restricted custody. Anne broke the silence with the result of the internal account. The Princess Royal explained that the person who lifted the restriction had assumed Camilla's status as queen, overrode earlier family instructions. Charles rejected that interpretation immediately. Rank, he made clear, did not automatically cancel a boundary built around private memory. Anne watched him closely, knowing that this ruling would shape far more than one disputed pendant. William then made his own request. The prince asked for every remaining restricted piece connected to Diana to be reviewed, so nothing similar could happen again. Charles agreed. That decision quietly gave his son greater influence over how his mother's private legacy would be protected, and William understood the weight of it. Catherine should have felt relief. Instead, she looked at Camilla and saw something unresolved. The locket was gone, the order had been corrected, and the ceremony could continue. But procedure had solved only the practical problem. Between the two women, something far more personal had been reopened. The pendant was gone, but the hardest conversation was still ahead. And this time there would be no aids, no ceremony, and nowhere for either woman to hide. After the officials left, after Charles made his decision, and after William stepped away to speak with the ceremonial team, Catherine and Camilla found themselves alone. The crisis had stripped away rank, protocol, and public posture. One woman carried the legacy of the princess she had never met. The other carried decades of history with her. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Camilla said something Catherine had not expected, and the confrontation changed completely. Catherine knew winning the argument over the locket had not repaired what the moment had exposed. Before William returned to his duties, she asked the prince for a few minutes alone, and he agreed, because he understood that procedure could settle possession without settling pain. Camilla remained behind. The queen consort had spent years knowing Diana's name could change the temperature of any royal conversation, but this time the symbol had rested against her chest, making distance impossible. Camilla finally spoke through a private conversation, with no aides present. She told Catherine that the locket had been described to her only as a quiet historical piece from a private collection, meaning a group of personal royal possessions kept away from ordinary public display. She said she had not understood the restriction attached to it. Catherine listened without interrupting, but her sadness remained. She answered that intention mattered, yet memory mattered too, especially when the object belonged to someone whose absence still shaped William's life. Catherine then explained what had frightened her most. William rarely spoke dramatically about his mother's belongings. He protected those memories quietly, almost carefully. So seeing his expression change, the instant he recognized the locket, told her more than anger ever could. Camilla lowered her voice. She admitted that she recognized Diana wearing the pendant only after Catherine stopped the ceremony. The moment she heard the question, "Where did you get that?" she understood why the room had turned cold. Camilla still held the empty chain clasp between her fingers. She set it down and made a promise. She would never again request a personal item associated with Diana. Catherine did not embrace her, and she did not pretend the wound had vanished, but she accepted the statement. That acceptance mattered, because it marked the first movement away from accusation and toward restraint. Then both women prepared to return. Catherine carried quiet resolve. Camilla carried the weight of what had happened. When they left the room together, the confrontation had changed into uneasy understanding. But outside, the public had already noticed the interruption, and unanswered silence was becoming its own story. Inside, the family had finally lowered its voices. Outside, the silence had created a storm of its own. The public had not heard the private confrontation, but it did not need to. Cameras had captured Catherine breaking formation, Camilla touching the gold pendant at her neck, and William immediately moving toward them. Within hours, those few seconds became the defining image of the ceremony. Britain began asking why one small locket had stopped one of the monarchy's grandest events. And when Diana's name entered the story, curiosity turned into something far more emotional. Broadcasters replayed the interruption again and again. Catherine's fixed expression, Camilla's instinctive movement toward the pendant, and William leaving his expected position to approach his wife became the focus of every discussion. Palace communications eventually confirmed that a personal family matter involving an item of historical significance had briefly disrupted ceremonial positioning. That careful phrase mattered, because ceremonial positioning means the precise placement and movement of royals during an official event. Even without naming Diana, the statement admitted the interruption had been real. William watched the coverage later beside Catherine and grew visibly uncomfortable as his mother's memory became headline material once more. The prince had spent years learning that public fascination could turn private grief into spectacle within minutes. Catherine saw his frustration and told him quietly that she would make the same decision again under the same circumstances. He did not answer immediately, but he stayed beside her, and that silence carried approval rather than anger. Camilla watched separately with Charles and felt a different kind of pressure. Commentators began suggesting that wearing the locket had been a deliberate provocation. The queen consort turned toward the king and said quietly that this had never been her intention. Charles believed the error had already been identified, yet he also understood that public interpretation could not be corrected as easily as an internal record. Then one image took over the morning. A major fictional newspaper ran a full-width photograph of Catherine staring toward Camilla beneath the headline, "Diana's Locket Stops the Trooping." Copies appeared in the hands of a crowd gathering near Buckingham Palace, and the moment became a symbol larger than the object itself. Public feeling shifted again when the palace confirmed that the locket had been returned to restricted custody, meaning it was once more protected from ordinary ceremonial use. The announcement did not condemn Camilla, but it validated Catherine's concern. Now the pendant was secure, the ceremony was complete, and every major figure had faced Diana's memory in a different way. Only one judgment remained. The world had chosen its symbol. Now the family had to decide what that symbol would mean once the noise disappeared. By the end, the crisis was never really about gold. The locket mattered because it carried memory, loyalty, grief, and boundaries that had survived long after Diana herself was gone. Catherine's decision to stop the ceremony appeared shocking because royal life is built around continuation. Keep walking, keep smiling, keep the institution moving. But for one extraordinary moment, she chose remembrance over rhythm, and the family was forced to acknowledge that some symbols cannot simply be absorbed into ceremony. Charles received the final household review and read it without interruption. The investigation concluded that the locket had been released through an internal authorization error, with an old family restriction mistakenly treated as obsolete. A household review, in simple terms, is an internal examination of records, permissions, and decisions made by palace staff. The king responded immediately. Diana's pendant would return permanently to the protected group of her personal belongings, and any future use of those items would require direct consultation with William. William later learned through the documented review that the locket had been secured again. The prince felt relief, not victory. He told Catherine that the point had never been to stop others from touching his mother's history. It was to stop that history from being treated casually. She took his hand and admitted that halting the ceremony had frightened her because she knew the consequences could become enormous. He answered quietly that she had protected something he could not have explained fast enough in that moment. Camilla accepted the ruling without another confrontation. The queen consort kept the promise she had made privately to Catherine, and did not request another restricted personal item connected to Diana. Her response mattered, because restraint ended what anger could easily have prolonged. She left the dispute chastened, but not publicly defeated, and Catherine allowed the matter to close, without demanding humiliation. Charles understood the deeper lesson as well. The monarch had spent his life protecting continuity, yet this crisis showed him that institutional calm sometimes depended on respecting emotional boundaries rather than burying them. Diana's place in William's family could not be rewritten by procedure, status, or convenience. By recognizing that truth, the king restored order before private resentment hardened into something worse. Catherine's halted ceremony was ultimately remembered not as rebellion, but as a boundary drawn with courage. William felt his mother's memory had been defended. Camilla accepted the consequence. Charles restored clarity. The monarchy moved forward because nobody was forced to pretend the past had disappeared. There was no mystery left. Diana's locket returned to protected custody. Catherine's boundary stood, and memory kept its rightful place beside the crown.